Hello students, today we're going to talk about some GED testing strategies so that when you get close to being ready to take the test, you'll know the best way to go about it. Like every other kind of test, the GED is all about your being able to show what you know. And so we're going to help you do that to your best ability today. The first step is to get to know the test itself. The GED is made up of 4 parts: reasoning through language arts, mathematical reasoning, social studies, and science. Each section of the test has a potential of 200 points, but you don't need to get all the questions right. You only need to score 145 points to pass the test. The makers of the GED don't give you an exact system for converting correct number of answers into a score, but we know that there's approximately 65% of the questions that you have to get right in order to make that 145-point passing score. That should give you some relief. You don't have to get every single question right to pass the test. In order to pass the GED test, you need to score at least 145 points. This is how you earned your high school equivalency diploma, and that's your goal. The Technical College System of Georgia recognizes the score of 145 as a passing score, and it allows you to enter any college within the Technical College System of Georgia without taking any additional entrance exams like the AccuPlacer or the SAT or ACT, and that includes the West Georgia Technical College. So that's all you need to get into school. If you score higher, a 165 to 174, that's considered a college-ready score. And that's the kind of score that will probably get you into a college or university if you want to transfer after you've started at a technical college or at a junior college. So you might want to aim for this kind of score if you think that you might like to eventually get a 4-year degree. There's another category of score. This is called College Ready Plus, that is 175 points or higher, that the GED test claims will get you college credit at some places, but there's not any schools that I know of in the state of Georgia that will actually give you college credit for a score on the GED exam. So if you think you might eventually go on to get a 4-year degree, try to learn as much as you can while you're in our program so that you're not aiming to just pass at that 145 level. Keep in mind that college classes cost money. Even if you have gotten scholarships and grants and so forth, if you're unprepared to take a college level English or math class and perhaps you don't pass it the first time, then the next time you try to take that test, you may not get that scholarship or that grant or that money that you want to take that class. So every attempt you make at a class in the college level costs money, whereas preparing for classes here at the Adult Education Department is absolutely free. So try to learn as much as you can while you're here. Step 2 is what you're going to do before the test. Obviously, the most important thing for you to do is to attend class. That's either in person or online. Be consistent and disciplined about being in class. If you're not there every single time the class meets, you're going to miss information. And the more information you miss, the more lost you're going to feel. And you're going to feel tempted to drop out because you've gotten lost along the way. The class can't go back and review everything all the time, and so your best bet is to be in class consistently to get exposed to all the material that you need to learn. The other thing that you can do is after you've attended class, try to review the information as immediately as possible. Psychologists who study how the brain functions and how learning works tell us that reinforcing that knowledge immediately is like adding a whole nother layer of knowledge on top of what you learned in the classroom. And so it reinforces it, it helps it sink in, it helps you remember it so that it's not just something that went in one ear and out the other and you can't remember what you learned the next day. So try to review information immediately after you learn it as possible. The next thing to do is to always review your weaknesses. Really focus in on those things that you are struggling with. Now you can do that by practicing on your own the things that you just don't quite get as easily as other parts. And I've included a whole list of GED preparation resources in this Blackboard assignment that you can review on your own. Another strategy you can have for learning to pass the GED test is just to simply read every day. Reading focuses your mind, it helps you understand things, it helps you learn, and the more you read, the more vocabulary you're going to pick up naturally, the more grammar you're going to pick up naturally. And so these skills in reading will help you with the RLA test, but they'll also help you with the social studies and the science test as well, both of which also have big reading components to them. So keep your brain stimulated by reading every day. And it can be on your phone, it can be a hard copy book, it can be magazines, whatever interests you, read, 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 read. A way to prepare for the RLA section of the GED is to practice writing essays. There's a section on the GED RLA test called the Extended Response Essay, and it's 45 minutes long, and it counts 20% of your GED RLA score. And so this is something you need to practice. Don't just assume that you can sit down in a test setting and just crank out an essay in 45 minutes. It's a really pretty difficult task, and so it takes going through the process of doing this several times in order to get to the place where you feel comfortable with it and you can make the best use of your time, because time is not your enemy, it's not your friend in writing an essay in 45 minutes. So strategize about how you're going to spend that 45 minutes. And here's one suggestion here in the box on the slide here, that you will spend the first 15 minutes, and I know that sounds like a lot of time, but it's time well spent, but 15 minutes to jot down some notes for yourself, to think about the question that's been posed to you, consider the prompt, consider your logical response to that prompt, and really plan what you're going to say. Think about what your idea is going to be for each paragraph of your essay. And then actually write the essay for about 25 minutes. But then this is the other critical part that people are tempted to skip because they'll just keep writing until they run out of time. And that is to allow yourself 5 minutes at least at the end of that 45-minute period to go back and check what you've written, make sure it makes sense, to revise anything, take some stuff out or add a little bit more if what you've written doesn't make sense, or correct your grammar. Make sure you've got those capital letters at the top, at the beginning of every sentence, and you've got your periods in there. I've read essays before that are just like one long sentence. A student will start a paragraph and not put a period until the very, very end of that paragraph, no matter how many sentences they've written. So make sure that you don't make that mistake. Put periods in there where they belong, and correct your grammar. A few more tips to consider when writing your extended response is to avoid using I. Unless the prompt specifically asks you for your opinion on a topic, then assume that it wants you to comment on a topic from a more distant third-person point of view. So, for example, instead of saying, I think it's a good idea to raise the minimum wage because it just makes sense, okay? That's a first-person statement. Say, the minimum wage should be raised because, and they give a specific example, because my sister works at minimum wage and she's only able to earn about $15,000 a year. And that's not enough to live on, especially when you consider that her rent is $1,000 a month. Okay, so use a specific example that you're familiar with, and that should be part of your planning. That 15 minutes of planning that you're going to do is to think about specific examples that you can use to reinforce your logic in your essay. The other thing that's really important for you to do to prepare for the extended response, and really for the whole GED test, is to practice typing. It's hard to type an essay in 45 minutes, including the thinking time, including the revision time, unless you can type pretty quickly. So if you're still doing sort of a hunt and peck kind of typing, and you haven't learned to use all 5 fingers on the keyboard without looking, then take some time to learn how to type, you can go to typing.com and get lessons for free that will start you out at the very, very beginning with type L, type J, and practice, practice, practice until you get your typing skills up to speed. Not only is this great preparation for taking the GED exam, but it's also just a fabulous life skill to have. Almost every job that you could possibly want to apply for these days is going to require some kind of work at a computer keyboard, and so a typing skill is a skill that's going to last you a lifetime. For the math section of the GED exam, you're going to want to familiarize yourself with the tools that you're going to have available. Now, if you're taking the GED in person, you will have access to a TI-30 calculator, an actual handheld real live calculator. If you're taking the exam at a distance online, you will only have access to the calculator on screen. And so you need to familiarize yourself with both of those tools. You need to practice doing your basic functions, how to add or subtract or multiply quickly. And the more you practice, the more smoothly and effortlessly that will be, and therefore the less time you'll waste referencing a sheet to try to figure out just how to use the calculator. So you don't want to waste your test time just figuring out the calculator. There is a GED Maths formula and symbols reference sheet that will also help you figure out how to do certain kinds of equations using the calculator. During the test. On the day of the test, you're going to want to eat a good breakfast and be well rested before you get there. If you've been up all night trying to cram, you're going to be tired and fatigued, and your brain is not going to be working at its very, very best. So feed your brain some good food for breakfast. Arrive in plenty of time. You don't want to be rushing in the door at the last minute and feeling anxious about it. Also, be sure to bring your ID. Even if you've pre-registered for the test, which of course you'll need to do, you must bring your ID with you to be allowed to take the test. Okay, once you get in the actual test setting, there are certain things you can do to help you achieve and show the best of what you know. And the first thing to do is to pace yourself. Know how long each section of the GED lasts. That way you don't get caught off guard when time's up and you thought, oh my goodness, I had just gotten started. So know how long each test lasts. This changes from time to time, so make sure that you have the most recent information. I've put on the screen here the times that are correct for right now. Know that also, because the mathematical reasoning section lasts 115 minutes and has a certain number of questions, that on average you'll have about 2.5 minutes per question. That sounds like a lot of time, so you shouldn't feel too awfully rushed when you're going through the math section. So watch the timer, but don't rush. Don't get in a panic. The second thing that you should think about is to skip questions when you're stuck. It can be so frustrating to run across a question, especially if it's early in the exam time, where you just can't figure out the answer. It's a multiple choice math question, for instance, and you've looked at all the answers and none of them match the number that you came up with when you worked the equation, and you're just ready to pull your hair out from the beginning. Don't let a question like this get you off your game. Just skip it. You can always come back to it later, but remember, you don't have to answer every single question correctly to pass the exam. So feel free to skip questions when you're stuck. Also, there's a little flag on the screen that you can click on to skip a question and come back to it. It looks like this. So click the top right-hand corner of your screen to flag that question to come back to it later. And when you get to the very end of the test, you'll have a screen that shows you the questions that you've answered, the questions that you've skipped, the questions that you've flagged. And all you have to do is click on that flagged question to be able to go back and look at it again and try and answer. Which leads us to the next tip, which is to answer every question. If you get toward the end of your time and you've just got 2 or 3 minutes left in math and you've skipped 10 questions, go back and just guess, just guess. It's best if you can at least eliminate some wrong answers before you make a guess. If you can improve your odds by eliminating, say, 2 or 3 wrong answers, then you've got maybe a 50-50 chance of getting the question right, even if you're really not sure about your answer at all. But when you're in that place where you're going back and reviewing the test and trying to make sure that you answer every single question, even if all you've got time to do is click A as the right answer for every single question, that's better than leaving it blank. Because even if you're just guessing completely in the dark, you've still got a 20% chance of getting the question right if you put some answer down. Whereas if you leave it blank, you have 0 chance of getting any points for that question. Another thing that you should think about is that sometimes the answers are opposites, like this answer is always true, or this answer is never true. 2 things that completely disagree. And a lot of times when they're developing the test questions, they will develop answers that say this thing and then the complete opposite of that thing. And a lot of times one of those answers is correct. Not always, but a lot of times. Different questions have different point values. So for example, if you're doing a 2 fill in the blank question, it's say in the social studies section, you may have 2 blanks to fill out, and you know one but don't know the other, go ahead and put one of them in there, because a lot of times those 2 blank questions will be worth 2 points instead of just 1. And so make sure that you've answered every blank, even if it is just a guess, because a guess is better than nothing, right? Number 4 is to read each question fully. Don't begin reading a question and assume you know where it's going, and so you just sort of skip ahead because you're in a hurry to the answer. That's a good way to get a question wrong. So watch out for tricky words like not that will change the whole approach that you take to a question. For instance, a question may say, what is not a step in the scientific method? Which of course is a completely different answer than what is a step in the scientific method. So read each question all the way to the end before you decide on your answer. Also, when you're doing especially true-false types questions, look out for words like never and always, words we call absolute values, because never and always are almost never true, because so few things in life are never or always. For instance, you may have a question like, federal laws always take precedence over states' laws, which is probably not true. And it may be that they usually take precedence, but not always take precedence. So read those questions carefully. Tip number 5. In the reading comprehension sections of the RLA test, take a glance at the questions that follow the passage before you start reading it, even the first time through. That way you'll know what information you're going to be asked, and you can be looking for it the very first time you read through. Otherwise, you'll read a passage, you'll get to the end, you'll read the questions, and then you have to go back and hunt for that information back in the passage, and that way you'll lose time. Also, be sure to scroll down using the little slider mechanism on the screen to make sure that you're reading the entire passage. Otherwise, you may get to the questions and think to yourself, I don't remember reading anything about that. And it may be because you didn't read the entire passage. So make sure that you're reading the entire passage. When you're doing your answers, be sure to answer the questions based on the information that's actually in the passage and not just what you think about a particular question. Also, in analysis questions, it's a good idea to sort of get in mind what you think the answer to a question is before you read the answers. Now, so that's sort of the opposite of the reading comprehension strategy. If you're trying to look at a graph or a chart, for instance, and a question asks you, what kind of trend do you see in this chart? Kind of look at it yourself and decide what you think the answer is. Is the number of people earning GEDs growing or shrinking based on this chart? And decide that for yourself before you look at the answers, because sometimes the answers can be kind of confusing. And so more than one of them may sound like a convincing possible answer. And so if you have in mind what you think the answer is before you look look at those responses, you're more likely not to get confused at that point. Finally, we need to think about some strategies to manage the stress. Any kind of test that you're taking in a timed fashion is always stressful. You've spent a long time preparing for the test, and so you know a lot is riding on it, and it can just really get in your head. So think about ways that you're going to manage the stress before you get into the testing situation. As we've mentioned before, skipping questions that are stressing you out is a great way to avoid stress. But one of the things that can be easy to fall into is to have a sort of a mental tape running in your head that's saying, I can't do this, I can't do this, oh, I'm in a panic, I'm in a panic. And that voice in your head starts to override your ability to even read the questions or think about them. So you've got to shut that little voice out and not let it take over. Take some deep breaths. Think some happy thoughts, whether that's kittens or sunsets, whatever makes you happy. Just sort of take a mental break, even if it's just for 30 seconds, to sort of clear your mind and stop that tape going. And do some physical things to help relieve your stress as well. Take a minute to stand up, stretch a little bit, roll your neck, massage your face, whatever it is that helps you just sort of physically relieve some of the stress in your body will just really be worth the few seconds that it takes to do that. So to review our most important tips, keep up with your time, know how much time you have left throughout the test. There'll be a timer on your screen, and that will help you keep up. Do the easy questions first. So skip questions that stump you and flag them. Go back and do them later. And if you're still stumped on those questions, even when you go back to them, eliminate as many wrong answers as you can and then take a guess. Don't leave anything blank. Don't overthink things. Sometimes I think we tend to assume a question is wanting to trip you up and it's gotten your head all in a spin because you're trying to figure out exactly how they're trying to trick you. Just put down the most obvious answer sometimes, especially if you're really confused. And then pause and regroup as needed. And if you do need to retake a test, don't be discouraged. About 40% of GED takers need to repeat at least one section at least once. And so you're not alone. It's not the end of the world if you have to retake the test. So pick yourself up. You got this.